welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Daniel Libenson. I'm a member of the faculty at the University of St. Thomas School of Law, and I'm here to testify today to my own views, not as a representative of my institution. A few years ago, a modeling agent told me that he could make my son a star if I signed a contract and paid just $500 up front. I wanted to think it over with my wife, but the agent said I had to sign and pay right now, or the offer would disappear and my son would never forgive me for losing his once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I walked away and later discovered on the internet that the agency was a scam. We've all met high-pressure salespeople. The secret to their success is convincing you that the only way to avert a catastrophe is to buy the relatively cheap product that they're selling. They force you to decide right now, because otherwise you'll discover that there is no crisis and that the price they're asking is too high. This amendment's sponsors are using classic high-pressure sales tactics to force upon us a premature and costly decision that threatens our constitutional democracy and the freedom of every Minnesotan. We should not buy what they're selling. There is no same-sex marriage crisis in our state. Minnesota already prohibits same-sex marriage by statute, and the Minnesota Supreme Court held in Baker v. Nelson that Minnesotans of the same sex cannot marry. There are no same-sex marriages cases pending in our courts. In fact, Minnesotans are in the midst of a productive dialogue on this issue. People of faith on both sides are engaging in conversations. Polls show that Minnesotans are still making up their minds. Even though constitutions should be amended only when there is broad consensus after a dialogue has ended, proponents of this amendment, like high-pressure salespeople, want to stop our deliberations and force us to decide right now. That is not democracy. There is no crisis, and the amendment that they're selling us is not cheap. It will cost us the foundation of our freedom and the soul of our state. Our nation's founders worried that unchecked governments tend to oppress minorities and stamp out dissent. They also recognized that every person is sometimes in the minority. So they built the principle of minority protection into the very fabric of our constitutional tradition. Congress and the Minnesota legislature have rejected every proposed amendment that excluded minorities because they knew that once we use the Constitution to hurt minorities, we begin to dismantle our Constitution's protective shield and leave everyone vulnerable. Perhaps the highest cost of the amendment stems from the fact that it is far broader than necessary to deal with the concerns that supposedly justify it. If this were really about judges or lawsuits, the amendment could simply reserve to the legislature the exclusive right to define marriage. This amendment, with its sweeping prohibition of civil unions and domestic partnerships, is one of the most restrictive in the nation. It is mean in a state that prides itself on niceness, a state with a rich history of tolerance and religious pluralism, a state that welcomes refugees and is the nation's capital of international adoptions. This amendment is antithetical to the core values of Minnesota. It is so not nice, so un-Minnesotan, that I would say its proponents are offering us a Faustian bargain. In return for eliminating the specter of same-sex marriage, they are demanding our state's very soul. After the passage of the Voting Rights Act, my father traveled to Mississippi to help register African Americans to vote. My grandmother, whose parents and sisters were murdered by the Nazis only 20 years before, begged him not to go. She said, "If you have the energy to do this work, why don't you help rebuild the Jewish community?" And my father replied that it was precisely because our family was killed in the Holocaust that I must go to Mississippi. His point was that we who have been persecuted because we were seen as not normal have a moral duty to ensure that such persecution never happens to others. At the same time, my father was expressing his faith in America. He was telling my grandmother that our family could be safe here as long as we worked to ensure that America remained true to its founding principle of equality under the law. I believe in America too, and I'm proud to be here today carrying on my father's legacy. My wife is 9 months pregnant with our second child, which hopefully isn't being born while I'm sitting here. And I am asking you to preserve our Constitution as the protector of my children's freedom and the freedom of every person in this state. Article 9 of the Minnesota Constitution gives the legislature an important role in the amendment process. That role is not to rubber stamp every amendment anyone proposes. It is to act as a gatekeeper, to reject amendments that threaten our democracy. For you to approve this un-Minnesotan and un-American amendment, the product of high-pressure sales tactics designed to extinguish dialogue, is precisely what you promised not to do when you took the oath of office and swore to support the Constitution of the state of Minnesota. Everyone knows that the correct response to high-pressure sales tactics is to walk away. As a law professor, as a Jew, as a husband and a father, and as a Minnesotan, I implore you to walk away from this very bad deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.